one of the things that I find most challenging myself as a student of history, and that I find challenging communicating to my students, is why something like the history of women's roles or status in a given society doesn't always track along with other progressive trends in the history of Western civilizations. We can't draw a straight line saying, here, that women's power is always increasing in some way. Women in ancient Mesopotamia, for example, 4,000 years ago, could divorce their husbands, they could own property, they could operate businesses. In other words, they had equalities and opportunities that women didn't have until the later 19th century in a lot of modern civilizations. If we look at something like ancient Greece, we see the dawn of democracy and the birth of this idea of the equality of men with certain property rights, certain levels of property. But I can't think of a society that I'd less like to live in as a woman than ancient Athens, because of the way that women were sequestered and kept separate from any type of meaningful public activity. So I find this very difficult myself to explain to students.
Yeah, I think one way to look at it might be to sort of explore the ways that notions of gender difference, and in particular notions of gender difference that define a specific social role for women, are often very important for a given society's conception of order. And a moment of progressive change is a moment in which order is being challenged. And it's precisely at that moment that they look for ways to anchor and stabilize and comfort people about those changes. Just to give you some classic examples from the French Revolution, the question of women's participation in the new definition of citizenship and the new definition of the nation was posed right from the start. And there were women who were claiming, there was a society of revolutionary Republican women who wanted the right to bear arms and who wanted to participate in the revolution, who wanted to be citizens, who wanted to vote. But the revolutionaries themselves, who had just claimed the sort of universal citizenship, pulled back. And there's a famous moment when, I can't remember his name, the member of the Parisian Municipal Council, when faced with a group of women who were making demands, he looked at them in anger and he said, "Do I have breasts to feed my children?" And the argument was clear, is that politics was for men, and he couldn't go home, right? He didn't have breasts. Their role was clear. So you don't want to overdraw this. There were actual real benefits for women in the French Revolution. Marriage was redefined as a civil contract. They had the right to divorce. They could, as a legal, they had a legal personality. They could sue for paternity and inheritance, all these sorts of things. But those didn't last, and ultimately that moment was lost. French women didn't get the vote until 1944.
This is so helpful to think about, because it helps to explain why women in traditional societies and tribal societies tend to have much more gender equality and much higher status and much larger array of opportunities, precisely if we use your theory, which is very compelling, precisely because there isn't a lot of rapid change. Yeah. In other words, in times when we're not in crisis and we're not perceiving ourselves to be in a revolutionary situation, women, the opportunities available to them are very open. So, for example, in the early Middle Ages, in Northern Europe, in Scandinavia in particular, one of the things that's been argued is there really wasn't even a two-gender model. There was essentially a one-sex model of gender, and that really it was about powerlessness versus power. And you could basically end up anywhere on that sliding scale, whether or not you were a man or a woman. Men tended to have some advantages because, some physical advantages, or because of their strength or being warriors or whatever. But women could also be basically gendered as masculine if they behaved in powerful ways. And then in fact this one gender model tends to favor women because women have nowhere to go but up on this scale, whereas men have the capacity to basically sink into, for example, old age is gendered in medieval society is essentially an effeminate state. You don't, one of the reasons why warrior cultures valorize the death of beautiful young men is because they the being old is such a terrifying thing. It makes you female.
And maybe by way of conclusion, we should point out that it's in particular moments of progressive change where certain groups are claiming the right to restructure the political order that gender, and in particular the specific obligations that women face are reinforced. At other moments of crisis, which are not necessarily progressive in their origins, like warfare, women in some ways find opportunities to expand the ways that they participate in society. Again, the classic example in modern European history is the First World War, where women enter the workforce, middle-class women become nurses, become familiar with male bodies in ways that were unavailable to them before the war. And after the war, there's a debate about the liberated woman who's smoking and getting all sorts of different kinds of haircuts, fashion changes. I mean, there's this period is seen as a period in which women make remarkable progress. It came out of crisis, but it's not a crisis that's associated with a kind of that we would define as a moment of progress in any way.